So it's about what changes we can make and whether we're ready to make some decisions. And I know that's extremely broad, but that's what I would say. And of course, like some kind of introspective process where you're regularly reviewing, okay, what can I do differently if this isn't working out?
What's up, ADHD reWired listeners, and welcome to the second week of ADHD Awareness Month. If you were listening to this early enough on the day it came out, why not join me and the rest of the ADHD reWired team for our monthly live Q&A? Go to adhdrewired.com/events to get registered so you can join us live on Zoom today at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 Eastern to get your ADHD-related questions answered. And immediately after our Q&A, we're having a post-Q&A registration session for our fall season of coaching and accountability groups that starts in just 2 days. So for all of you listeners who thrive at getting stuff done at the very last minute, that moment is now because we start this week on Thursday, October 12th. So if you thought you missed your chance to join us, then head on over now to coachingrewired.com and get your name added to our fall coaching group interest list. Or click on the events tab to register for our live Q&A. And if you want to join us but can't make it to our post Q&A registration event, we've added an option for you to schedule a registration interview at a time that works best for you over the next day or two. But don't wait, our evening section is now full. We do have 3 spots left in our morning section that meets at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 Eastern. And to all of you entrepreneurs and remote workers and those who have flexibility in your day, we still have spots left in my section, which meets at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern. Oh, and in case you missed our announcement that we rolled back the cost of our program to pre-2020 pricing, all that information is on the website. Go to coachingrewired.com, but don't wait because we start this week. And to all of our alumni who might be interested in going through ARC again, check your email because we are offering you a special alumni appreciation discount. We hope to see you soon. And now, on with the show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. We are here for our live monthly Q&A. It is September 12th, 2023. And if you were listening to this, I hope that you had a good September and your November is going well. All right. See how I traveled into the future from where I'm sitting right now? It was a stretch. All right. So Erica, what is your question?
Thanks. Hi, everybody. My question is, when I talk to my friends and some family and, some of their children, or they say, well, my daughter thinks she has ADHD, or my niece thinks she has ADHD because they can't do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, well, have they gotten tested? I don't know really how to approach it. I feel like you have to get tested. That's my understanding of it. This whole thing about self-diagnosis and kind of what to say to people and how to guide them is something I would just like to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah. So what do you think your friend is looking for when sharing that information with you?
She's looking for help for her child who she thinks is struggling.
Okay.
She thinks she sees signs of it. She doesn't have ADHD, but there's kind of this inattention and certain things like that. So I don't know if she's been tested, but I just don't really know how to guide people, or my friend, or even her daughter. Should she want to talk to me?
I think that, validating the concerns, as a friend, saying it could be, but you're not a doctor or a clinician. So it's, you can only share what your own experiences are, but that, it might be worth seeking out professional consultation on this. And I think the one maybe caveat to also maybe share is that not all doctors or clinicians really understand ADHD. So maybe just kind of, if it's available in your area, to really seek out a specialist. Because I think that's really important when going through that evaluation process.
Yeah.
I can ask my panel here. Brian, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on this one?
Well, are we looking for practical solutions, or how to, like, the literal how-to steps of how to get an evaluation, or how to counsel somebody who thinks they need an evaluation?
Well, maybe. Can I say both?
You can say both. I'm just curious if you had an approach. Like, I wasn't quite sure if you were reading it as like, I don't know how to advise these people because I don't have the information they're looking for.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm saying go to a specialist. And so that seems like the right thing to do. Has anyone ever been like self-diagnosed? And I know people do that, but that doesn't seem like a good path to me, but I don't know if that's a valid path.
I think those like online assessments, they're
Right.
valid for should you take another step, right? Like if it says like high
Okay.
likelihood, then to me, like print that out and bring it to,
Oh, that's a good idea.
yeah, because it's obviously it's an online assessment, so take it for what it's worth. It's not
Yeah.
the most complex thing to diagnose if you know what you're looking for. Like it's, I mean,
Right.
which is frustrating because there's a lot of misdiagnoses and people who just don't understand ADHD. And there are also
Right.
professionals who will, say things like "Oh, ADHD isn't real or it's overdiagnosed.
Right.
So there's that too.
Right. Yeah. And, to your point, Brian, like the practical thing, if there isn't someone in your area and, your PCP may not be a person who understands it well enough to diagnose it to what you were just saying, Eric, like maybe it's not real or here, have some drugs. And so that doesn't seem like a great idea. But I guess if you just look up therapist ADHD center or something, it can get expensive, I guess, but you got to get the diagnosis at some point.
Yeah, and there was, and I think it was the last time that I had Russell Barkley on the podcast. I was
Mm.
asking him about an editorial that he wrote in his ADHD report newsletter. It was basically saying like stop requiring people to get a neuropsychological evaluation for ADHD because it's a barrier for a lot of people and it's not
Yes.
necessary. Like unless you were looking at complex coexisting disorders, learning disabilities, other things like that, like it's really not necessary because those can be thousands of dollars, right? Like gold standard evaluation is clinical interview, rating scales, like valid rating scales filled out by the patient, the client, and people that love them and know them well, right? So you have that other
Okay.
reporter. That's really
Um,
it. Like it doesn't need to be this multi-day, half day, all day long thing that a lot of people think is required. If you have the
yeah.
availability and the resources and access to that, I mean, it's certainly interesting, but I don't think it's required.
So it's really a therapist or a clinical psychologist, somebody who says that anybody can do it, or they would say, I do ADHD testing. How do you know?
I would have them ask like how much of your practice is focused on ADHD.
Okay.
Yeah, you can also
Oh,
ask like
okay.
what's the last training you went to in ADHD? Like what's your what one tip that I think is I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but if you look on let's say Psychology Today and you see someone
Yeah.
has ADHD listed as a specialty, but they also have 10 other things listed as a specialty, there's a good chance it's not really a specialty.
Yeah. Right.
They're probably
Right.
doing kind of keyword search stuffing and they're like, yeah, they work with ADHD, but like, do they really get it? That's
Yeah.
important. Laura?
Right.
I can't speak to this from a professional standpoint, but I have recently watched somebody go through this process with a neuropsychologist, and I've been through it myself with several psychiatrists. And I think that the most important thing, regardless of who you're going to, is actually to walk in with a list of red flags in your brain and a
That's
list
a good
of
one.
green flags, for lack of a better term. Because if they say things like, you've come this far, you can't have ADHD, or you've come this far, it doesn't matter if you have ADHD because you've come this far, so I don't think you need medication.
Yes.
People who say you shouldn't take your meds on the weekend, quality of life is not as important on the weekend as it is at work.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things,
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
know, oh, this person isn't up to date on the research, and know that you can walk
Right.
out and go talk to somebody else. So I just think that that's a really important thing while walking in.
Yeah. That's really good.
And I see some
Good
people
one.
in the chat talking about like having to be on a wait list for a long time. So if that is also the process where
Mhm.
that's what they're coming up against, I would say get the name on the wait list, but keep pursuing other options.
Mhm. Right.
Brian?
Well, I just want to add a follow-up point. I fully agree with Russell Barkley's position, like stop requiring people to get a neuropsychological evaluation because it's kind of like a socioeconomic barrier at that point that
Yes.
shouldn't exist.
Exactly.
But as a matter of practical, just the way the world is today, like most healthcare management organizations, if you want your insurance company to
That's
provide you
right.
services, they will want some kind of evaluation. And I can't speak to every health insurance provider, but usually that is a very arduous process to go through. Like I was not medicated until about 2 years ago. I went through that process with my insurer, and to get that, I had like I had bulletproof documentation, like actually like studies from doctors when I was much younger. But if I didn't have that, it would have been much more difficult to get the insurance. So pointing out
Right.
the distinction there, like you can go get that evaluation from a therapist, but you don't need it. But if you want to access services, most
Yep.
places are going to require you to do that before they prescribe or cover the prescription.
Right. Right. That's a great point, Brian. Yep.
Erica, I hope that's helpful.
That's super helpful. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And thanks to those in chat.
Awesome. All right, let's go to another question. We have one from Jenny, who can't go live, so I'll read her question. And Jenny asks, how do you all overcome the difficulty of transitions? I know what needs to be done, but why is transitioning from one thing to another feel like such a chore? Great question. And I just want to first say, me too. Transitions are probably one of my biggest ADHD challenges. So when we think about the our brain's attention networks, they say networks plural because there are multiple attention networks that do different things. One of the attention networks that is impaired in ADHD is the task switching network. It just doesn't switch real easily. Like for this morning, so my actually son is in the room next to me here at the office because he's home. He didn't go to school because of a cold. So this is a sort of a big transition in my mind because I got to like move stuff around, and the image of what I thought my morning was going to look like was now not going to look like that. Intellectually, I know, look, I'm dad. My job is to help take care of my kid. Emotionally, my brain was having a tantrum, right? Like I was just like, "Ugh, this is so frustrating." So I trying to like validate like that it's not a personality thing. This is like our brain is having a hard time. It knows what it's trying to do, and that's why it feels frustrating. Think of like train tracks when there's a signal failure. It's kind of like that. So transitioning, I think a lot of this depends on context of what's kind of happening at the time. One thing, if you're able to even set up starting a task prior to going into it, that can make it easier. For example, if I have something that's like a writing task, and I know that maybe I'm not going to want to transition to doing that, I'll actually open a document with that writing task before I actually need to start on it. So it actually makes just getting engaged in it a little bit easier. I'm going to ask Brian and Laura, any tricks that you've come up with for transitioning?
Well, one thing that has been effective for me is the concept of habit stacking, where you start to associate certain things with other, and this is dependent on the idea that these things are go together on a regular basis, not completely novel situations. But if you have certain situations that go together, like for me, I've always struggled with transitions leaving my office on time at the end of the day and not just puttering around. Habit stacking it with, okay, what's the next thing coming up and how do I connect those two things so your brain starts framing them together, and that takes some of the load of the burden of the executive function off of that task switching network where you already have your brain primed to do that. So for me, it's like when I get in the morning and I know I want to leave work at 5 and I want to go to the gym afterwards, like I put that gym bag like right there next to my office chair. So I have to literally trip over it. And I can't just forget that. Or I set a reminder. There's something that connects the two tasks together is what we generally refer to as habit stacking. It takes a little bit of load off of the executive function that you need to move back and forth.
And
I don't know how to explain habit stacking better than that.
that was pretty good. Yeah, no, I mean, it's just basically like link it to something you're already doing, like something new to something you're already doing. There's also like priming as a tool for transitioning. So what I had said before about like opening up a Word document or Google Doc to help make that ease into that new task easier, that's a priming example, right? It's sort of like getting the brain ready to make that shift. Even like bigger, maybe there's something bigger going on. Something that I do for when I'm doing some bigger planning things in my life, that if I know I'm coming up, say, on yearly planning, I don't want to just see on my calendar for the first time if I turn to it like on that week, like, oh, I have to plan my year now. Like I'm not ready to do that. Right. But if I put on my calendar, yearly planning is in 2 weeks, I don't have to do anything with that other than like, it's like, okay, my brain's gonna start thinking about that. I'll put it in the following week. Yearly planning is next week. Right. Like, and I might even prime myself with some questions. So when that activity is set to start, my brain has been anticipating this and makes it easier to sort of engage in it. Laura?
As we all know, executive functioning is limited and we need to recharge. So we really need to take breaks to reset, even if that break is just 10 minutes long. And I bring this up in the context of time blocking because a lot of us see time blocking as something that is immovable. And in fact, that time blocking is something that you made, and you can be flexible and you can scoot things around. And something that I really find imperative for myself is to always block in buffer space. Eric has another term for it that I don't love that much. But yeah, really
Pe-
thinking
People
about
either love it or they love to hate it. And since you're all probably curious, it's called SHART Space, which is an acronym for Shit Happens, Adjustment Recovery Time. You're welcome.
So going from there, this buffer space can be built into something that I really like to do called ideal days and ideal weeks. I will make a Google Calendar that is called Ideal Day, and I will make what would I like my day to look like today, and I'll block it out for the entire week. And then I will let that ideal day be the thing that shows up on my smartwatch instead of what I'm supposed to be doing, like what I actually blocked in. I want to look down and go, oh, my ideal self would be doing blah, blah right now. And sometimes that says my ideal self should be taking a break right now.
That's great.
So
That's a really great strategy.
And so one last thing, I have a resource, which would be episode 342, which is about transitions and balancing work and relationships with Addison Smith and, of course, Eric.
Ah, that sounds interesting. I should listen to that one. You know, the other piece too that we surprisingly haven't mentioned yet is accountability. Right? Like if we know that we need to be transitioning to something at a time that we know that you might have a tendency to maybe ignore our transition cues, right? Leveraging some accountability around that transition. So like I've done stuff where say I need to leave my office at a certain time and I know that I have a tendency to get stuck, especially if it's later in the evening. So I will reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm going to check in with you, let you know, or I'll take a selfie while I'm in my car. This is something we talk about in our coaching groups, that accountability is on, the onus is on me if I need the accountability to be the person that initially says, I'm going to reach out. The accountability piece is it's kind of that safety net. So if the person doesn't hear from me, then the hope is then they reach out and say, hey, are you still at the office? Get your ass out of there in the nicest way possible. All right. We got another question here, and then we're going to take a break. We got Charles. Hello, Charles.
Hello, how are you?
Doing great. How you doing?
Good. Let me see. First of all, I would like to, is it okay to respond to Jenny V?
Yes, do it.
Okay. So this problem of transitioning is probably my core problem. I might know exactly what I need to do and why I need to do it, but what I'm doing instead is so much more appealing. And when I think about, shifting toward this other task, and most of my tasks that I do are tasks I've never done before. So I don't even have a mental framework for what the task is. So wrapping my head around this, shifting from what I really want to be doing, what feels good to me to be doing at the moment, to taking on, creating this whole new mental framework and diving into it is really, really hard. So that's, I'm looking for ways to deal with that. I actually do have a trick that I'm using for about the last 3 days. It seems to be helpful, but I don't want to hijack, this.
Well, go ahead and share that trick because we're all curious, and then ask your question.
Okay. All right. So first of all, the way I look at this challenge is that almost, and this is for everybody, most of what we do and the behaviors that we engage in are reflexive. They're based on what we've been doing and what is present to, we're exposed to at the moment. It's only when we encounter a problem where we don't know how to flow into the desired behavior that we have to stop ourselves and be rational about what we want to do and make a specific choice, that kind of a thing. And so for me, I look at this challenge is I have like this emotional landscape that drives me in a particular direction. And that's kind of, I would get in this flow, and it's something that might be very appealing to me, but what I have to do, which is different, is kind of uphill from where I'm at. So the challenge, the way I look at it is that we got to shift the emotional landscape so that I flow into the work that I have to do. And this can be done, some of what you're talking about, might contribute to that. For example, working with other people, having other people depending on you, might shift that emotional landscape. Having an externally imposed deadline or something like that might shift that emotional impact or that landscape. So what I've been doing the last 3 days is to come up with a daily reminder that I say to myself, and use kind of the power of language to actually force myself to shift my emotional landscape toward what I want and away from all those temptations and things that get in the way of my goals. And then I also part of this reminder is a list of what it is that is required for me to actually get into the right mindset. So, I've got it right in front of me. It's a page long, so I probably don't want me to read it, but that's what I do.
And this might be a little bit of a controversial thing to say, but and I do like the idea, the framework of an emotional landscape. And I think it's also important that we like sort of reckon with the idea that if we are waiting to feel like doing a thing in order to get the thing done, we're going to have a really challenging life,
Yes.
right? Yes, it's lovely when we can get in the mood and ride the wave of activation and motivation. Like we all love that because it makes it easier. But what I think the real strategies that we're working on here is developing how do we do the thing that we really want and need to do when we don't feel like doing it. So just something to kind of consider. All right, so let's shift down to your question. What is your question?
So my question is that I was recently diagnosed with ADHD at 61 years of age, believe it or not. And so I'm in the very beginning of trying to understand myself through this new lens. And I'm seeking resources to help me achieve my goals in the life I want for myself, which is mostly around transitioning. How do I actually make it easier for me to do what I need to do? This is why I'm here. And so I want to know whether you have any words of advice for someone like me. And also, can you help me to understand your offerings, how they might help me and what the philosophy behind it is?
Absolutely. Okay. So first of all, congratulations on your diagnosis. I always tell people that, especially, really no matter how old you are, a diagnosis later in life, it doesn't change our past, but it does change our understanding of the past. And so there's going to be probably lots of things that you're going to be kind of thinking through and reprocessing and going, oh, that's why that was so hard. Or, oh, that makes so much more sense now. Of course I struggled with that. So just be mindful of and patient with yourself as you're processing all of this. So as far as kind of what's next for you, one of the things we know about what's called the multimodal treatment of ADHD is education around ADHD is one of the most important things, not the most important thing, but one of the most important starting off points, because this is a condition that the more we know and understand it, the more we can develop strategies around it. The more we could say that except that it's not a character flaw, right? Having ADHD is not a character flaw, right? It's a neurological flaw, if you want to call it that. Our brains are wired differently, right? So we may have things that our brains do quite well and quite easily that are very challenging for other people. And then often the flip is true as well. Like things that are very challenging for us, other people think that's easy. Like, why is that so hard? And that's where a lot of that shame piece comes in, because it's like, I don't know why this is so hard because it feels so impossible, right? So understanding kind of what's happening in the brain, I think, is a really important starting point. So, gathering the resources, reading, listening, however you kind of learn best. So you said you were just diagnosed. Are you working with a doctor and exploring medication?
I have been prescribed with Ritalin.
Okay.
And this is a little bit tricky because I don't actually like the way it makes me feel.
Okay.
And so, my task is he's giving me, a very low dosage, but a lot of them so that I can find out what is the right dosage for me. And because I don't really, like it so much, I get like palpitations and stuff like that sometimes. I haven't really, I don't feel like I've gotten there.
Okay. So on that point, be patient with the process. So statistics can be powerful. And I want to say that because that's what a medication trial is. It's trial and error. But when we hear trial and error, it sounds not scientific, but it actually is very scientific, the approach that we use for medication trials. So, you try one medication, you try variables of doses, and it sounds like that's what your doctor is doing. So that is good. I would encourage you to take some form of tracking. So you're not going in there, next time you see your doctor and just having the information that you can recall from the last 24 hours, which tends to be how we tend to report to our doctors,
Mhm.
That recency effect. But experiment with those doses as the doctor suggested. You said you're getting heart palpitations. I'm curious, how long have you been on whatever dose that you've been prescribed, and have you noticed any changes in that at all?
Well, let me see. So first of all, I don't know that the palpitations are directly a consequence of the Ritalin. It could also be because I stayed up late last night, and didn't get enough sleep, that kind of a thing. And actually, to be honest with you, I used to drink coffee a lot.
Me too.
And then this was like 24 years ago, and I started getting palpitations. So I decided, no, I'm going to go to decaf. I did notice kind of a shift in the way I felt and how I approached work, but I didn't recognize why. And then in 2006, I actually stopped even drinking any caffeine. So now I am drinking some coffee now. I am drinking because, Ritalin, if I can take Ritalin, I can drink a cup of coffee, right? So I'm just now starting to reintroduce stimulants to my life. And actually, sometimes it does really help me get in the zone and in the flow. So I can see how it helps me. But again, it's such an unfamiliar feeling to me. It's just not, I'm not drawn to it at all.
Are you taking it kind of intermittently?
I'm trying to take it every day.
Okay. Because that is one of the things with any of the side effects, they tend to be exacerbated when not used on a regular basis.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And be mindful that track what the positive benefits you're finding to the medication is, track the symptoms that you're not liking, right? And talk to your doctor about both of those. Because there are lots of ADHD meds out there. And we don't know why certain people respond differently to different ones. But it is worth the trial and error process, even though it's a bit of a pain, but it is worth doing it because when you get it right, and a lot of people who, when they get it right, will describe this feeling of, oh, is this what normal feels like? And that's kind of what we're going for, I think, when we're looking at medicating ADHD. Laura?
I wanted to go ahead and address the second part of Charles' question, which was about resources. And as we know, there are kind of two prongs of resources. There's the less expensive and there's the more expensive prongs. So I want to speak to the less expensive prongs. I've been looking at this a lot due to my dad recently being diagnosed at 75. I wanted to just say he's not medicated and he is a coffee fiend. He nurses coffee all day long. That's his form of medication. So there has been a lot less information historically on older people with ADHD. But the exciting thing is that information seems to be expanding right now. And so you can find resources through CHAD. Dr. Ned Hallowell is a major resource in terms of being a proponent for at least talking about ADHD in older adults. The NIH is now talking about it. And also we're starting to get a little more mainstream. AARP actually did a piece on ADHD in seniors recently, which I think is super cool. And then in terms of being slightly longer than those things, there is a book that I recommended a few times called Still Distracted After All These Years, and it's by Dr. Kathleen G. Nadeau, and I recommend taking a look at that one. But I will let Eric and Brian speak to coaching as the slightly more expensive prong.
So let's call it the bigger investment. So because it is an investment into our lives, right? So it's not just about throwing resources at a problem and seeing what sticks. With our coaching groups, and they are intensive, so it is a both investment of time and resources. Part of what we look at is, it's based off of a lot of evidence-based treatment approaches. This isn't therapy, this is coaching. We are looking at how do we, one, understand time, our intentions, our calendar. How do we really learn to do those kinds of things for the productivity stuff? But it's almost secondary to the stuff about acceptance of self and understanding the relationship that we have with our ADHD and looking at what are the things that are getting in the way of living our most intentional life that we get excited about. So we meet 3 times a week for 10 weeks. Our groups usually have up to 12 people in them. You get paired with typically a 4-person, 3 to 4 people in an accountability team. And it's intense. And we've been doing it for almost 10 years now. So it's, I know that it seems like since COVID, there's been a bunch of new players to the sort of the group coaching game. And that's great because there's definitely no shortage of the people who are looking for help and support. We've been doing it for a while. And I think that the results that we see with our program are pretty awesome. And we also know that one of my guarantees in the program is that at the end of the 10 weeks, you'll still have ADHD. So we have an alumni community, and we're actually for this this upcoming season, we're actually including 6 months in the alumni community for people who register. Brian, want to add anything to that?
You did an amazing job of describing the coaching program. I just want to circle back to where we started with the multi-pronged approach to ADHD management. And this is the coaching brings in the more holistic part of it, dealing with that discrepancy between how, we've lived our whole lives with Western, well, not even Western, just popular culture, ascribing our differences as ADHD people as character deficits. And I address that very heavily in my coaching. I take it very seriously. Like, we've been getting that messaging our whole lives, and it has been internalized. And the power of group coaching is that we can really open up about it. We can really address it and really learn how to reframe the rest of our lives by reframing our understanding of ourselves and how we've been affected by it. So I just can't, you can't really underestimate how important that internal reframing is. We also teach a lot of practical skills, and we coach around those, but the reframing of reimagining ourselves as ADHD people as being as equally as worthy as everybody else, and having a community around that can't be underestimated.
So I hope that is helpful for you. And we do have a registration event coming up this week.
One follow-up question is, are any of these, the coaching sessions or anything like that, reimbursable through insurance?
Typically not. I have heard of some people doing that and getting reimbursed, but I do want to say that, I'm not going to say that go ahead and do that because it's coaching and not therapy. So I don't know of what insurance plans or policies allow for the reimbursement of coaching. There may be some out there. I'm just not versed in that.
Okay.
Laura?
Just wanted to mention on that front, we have had many people be successful in getting their employers to compensate for this program. So that is something to consider, talk to your manager if that is a possibility.
Yeah, I work alone, so I'm my manager.
So ask your boss.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm looking at the time. We have not yet taken a break. We were talking earlier about how transitions are hard. So here's a transition. We will be right back. Support for ADHD reWired comes from ARC. ARC is ADHD rewired coaching. Learn more at coachingrewired.com. Our 34th season of coaching and accountability groups starts this week on Thursday, October 12th. That's right. We are beginning our fall season of coaching groups in just 2 days, if you're listening to this on the day it came out. And if you hear this early enough on Tuesday, October 10th, then join us after our live Q&A for our last registration event. And if you missed it, my team and I, we've opened up our calendars to meet with you on Wednesday. Just head on over to the website. Everything will be explained there. The website again is at coachingrewired.com. Add your name to our fall interest list so you can get your invitation to start the pre-registration process. If you're ready to make this investment in yourself, to go from time blind to time wise, to align your calendar with your priorities while nurturing healthy boundaries, improve your self-talk, I think it's time to give yourself permission to dream big and take action on the goals that matter most to you, then this is the group that you've been looking for.
I decided to join the group because I was really lost. I really felt like I was drowning in life. I would, in the mornings, just be like, why is this so hard getting ready for the day? When I'd come home from work, I would be like, why is this so hard? And not also knowing which direction to go. Especially as a mom, you just have people dependent on you. And when you're supposed to be the anchor, it was rough. And I needed something to do and to change where I was going, because really I was just floundering.
I decided to join the group both as a proxy to kind of move forward in my professional transition, as well as try a different approach to productivity and whatnot.
There really was a lot of value in hearing from other people and their experiences.
Something that I did not expect was just immediately recognizing myself in a lot. It literally feels like you're staring in a mirror for 10 weeks, but in a good way.
All those different perspectives help, and we all have brains where we make connections so well, and so that really helps us, how that really all fits together into one puzzle instead of flying by the seat of my pants like I I was before.
I am most proud of being able to undertake this journey with everyone else and feeling like I was able to provide some contribution to each other's growth. When I think of success, I now know that it's in literally any little thing, and it's not simply just related to this like big grand thing at the end of a journey. We're all here learning to support our future selves. That like still comes to the top of my mind like day to day.
If there's one thing we can promise at the end of the 10 weeks, it's that you'll all still have ADHD. But that doesn't mean the support stops there. With over 1,000 adults having gone through our award-winning coaching program, this community of growth-minded, compassionate people who really do understand you will be there for you. And when you join us this fall, you'll even be able to participate in our 5-week yearly planning workshop that starts at the end of November. So what are you waiting for? Do something different. Group coaching with ADHD rewired. Don't wait any longer. We start our fall season in just 2 days. So head on over now to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to the fall interest list. Again, go to coachingrewired.com. We can't wait to meet you and to start working with you. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back and we have Natalie who is here with a question. So, Natalie, what's your question?
Hi. So my question, basically, I'm pretty burnt out at work, and I was given or voluntold to take 2 weeks of rest. So I was wondering, what can I do in these next 2 weeks to improve my burnout and ensure I continue to improve when I return so I don't get burnt out again?
So, I think burnout is it's a really important question. It's an important conversation that we are having, because I think that as people with ADHD, we tend to kind of fire on all cylinders until we are on E, and tend to not notice when we're running low on that sort of longer term fuel, which leads to the burnout, until we are like hate everyone and everything and are just like struggling big time. And I've been referencing this book a lot recently, but it's called Burnout. I don't recall the authors because my brain doesn't hold on to names like that. And one of the things they talk about, I think is so valuable, is when it comes to burnout, that it's not about the stressor. So it's not necessarily about work in and of itself. It's about how we are actually managing the stress of the stressor. Basically, what it comes down to is doing physical stuff. It's exercise, it's sex and intimacy, things that are going to get the sort of the body's hormones sort of back in a state that feels healthy. Because it's not just about like decreasing the amount of work. It's about adding things that help us really physically process stress. In evolutionary terms, most of our lives were not spent sitting with our derrieres on a chair, right? So like when we have stress, like historically, we would be physically moving around and very sort of naturally processing that stress through our bodies. Most of our lives aren't like that anymore. So we have to be very intentional about what we are doing. So, I'm a huge proponent, and I know Brian is too, of exercise as a part of ADHD management. Brian goes like across California on his bike to manage his ADHD. He's like triathlon extraordinaire. Is it biathlon or triathlon?
I don't do the running part. So.
I'm not a runner either. Laura?
Okay, so to start with, the full title of that wonderful book about burnout is Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily Nagoski and Amelia Nagoski. They are sisters. One of them is a medical doctor, I believe, or a psychiatrist. I can't remember which. I apologize. The other one landed in the hospital because of burnout and was there for quite a while. I do want to mention this book is a little more geared towards women, but Eric has talked about how much help it was to him, and absolutely anybody can take stuff away from this. And I did want to list, they give just 6 things as ways of closing this stress cycle loop. And those 6 are physical activity, creativity, laughing, crying, physical affection, and deep breathing. That's a lot of stuff right there in just 6 bullet points.
Cool.
And actually, we're moving on from that. I just want to make one other point and one suggestion that popped up in my mind about what you can do over the next 2 weeks is maybe put something in place like a process of introspection, like a journaling process where you look at your lifestyle with a critical eye now that you're not up to your neck immersed in it, working every day. and contemplate what changes can be made going forward. And we've discussed some somatic approaches like exercise. They got that bullet point of the deep breathing from Laura, which I'm a huge fan of. Somatic work with breath work. We actually have that in our alumni community. We have a really amazing breath work and meditation instructor. That's how I developed the practice, was by having that resource available. But it's also about, making decisions about what can we change, what can we say no to. And it's not necessarily about reducing about them work, but also what we can add. So it's about wondering like what changes we can make and whether we're ready to make some decisions. And I know that's extremely broad, but that's what I would say, in unfortunately, like some kind of introspective process where you're regularly reviewing, okay, what can I do differently if this isn't working out? Because I'll say this, my conception of burnout is that it's often, I think of it as the nervous system taking the rest it needs by force. If you are not really meeting all your needs.
Say that again, Brian. That's worth repeating.
I look at burnout, I frame it a lot of times as their nervous system taking the rest it needs by force. Like, it's not getting what it needs and it can no longer function properly. So, we have to nurture it. And that's somatic approaches, but it's also about, putting ourselves and our self-well-being at the forefront, and sometimes making a hard decision about, well, I need to put my needs ahead of my job needs, at least part of the time. And a lot of people find that stressful and they find themselves avoiding that question. So an introspective process where you start with asking yourself the hard questions about what changes can be made.
Awesome. I actually did remember one more thing is I was looking at your group coaching program, and I was wondering if that would be helpful at all in my situation.
I'm biased, but yes. We're coming up on almost 10 years of doing this program. And the program we started with 10 years ago is not the same program that we have today, because I look at our coaching program sort of as a microcosm for how we manage life with ADHD. It's iteration, reflection, feedback, and keep doing that over and over and over again. So yeah, it's if you can dedicate the time to doing it, because that is, a really critical part of being part of the program, is really being able to say for the next 10 weeks, this really is a priority, not just in the words, but how we're actually spending our time and what we're saying no to.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
You bet. Okay. Let's take one more quick break. And by the way, at the end of this, I will happily stick around and answer any questions that people have specifically about the coaching program. So let's take a quick break and we will be right back. All right, it's time for what might be your new favorite part of this podcast, an ad for a product that doesn't really exist. Do you often find yourself searching for that missing sock? Or maybe you've tripped over one too many pairs of underwear on your way to the bathroom? Or are you tired of your partner asking you for the umpteenth time to stop leaving a trail of socks and underwear everywhere you go? We get it. We get it. Life's busy, especially when your brain's running on ADHD turbo speed. So, introducing the Sockinator 3000, the latest and greatest in-home cleaning technology. It's not just a robot vacuum. It's a sock, underwear, and dirty laundry detective. But you might be wondering, how does that work? Using state-of-the-art SockDar technology, the Sockinator 3000 hunts down your stray socks and underwear, scooping them up before you even notice they're missing. And if you're wondering, but what about those socks that are maybe under your bed? Fear not. With its ultra-slim design, the Sockinator can venture where no hands dare go. Under beds, behind couches, and even into the mysterious void that is in that space between your washer and dryer. And maybe you're wondering, but what about your delicates? Well, the Sockinator 3000 is gentle on delicates. It's been trained on thousands of underwear types, from boxers to briefs to lacy to those that are sporty. It handles all of them with care. So ADHD reWired listeners, if you'd like to experience the life-changing magic of all of your dirty laundry auto-magically finding its way to the hamper, the Sockinator 3000 is here to save the day. It really is like having a personal assistant for your floor. And maybe one day this dream product will become a reality. Until then, let ADHD reWired help you turn your dreams into reality. Whether it's body doubling in our twice-a-week Clean With Me sessions in our Adult Study Hall membership community, community that you can learn more about at adultstudyhall.com, or developing a routine that works for you when you join our coaching and accountability groups, or talking with other listeners in our free Facebook community, or joining our monthly Patreon coaching call for just $25 a month. All of these things can help you on your journey of getting your ADHD rewired.
And we're back to ADHD Rewired questions and answers.
All right. All right, Kathleen.
Hello.
Hi, Kathleen.
This
How
is
are you?
Kathleen. As you can tell from my question, I'm extremely wordy sometimes because I'm trying to be very specific. So which question are you looking at from me? I had a really long comment and then I had a question.
I'm gonna let you make the call on what question you would like to ask.
Okay, well, my question was, not long ago, I heard a broadcast, and I don't even remember who it was, so I don't know if it was on ADHD, but they actually read the definition that says what Medicare is going to cover and what it is not going to cover. And that's what my question was about. I was just wondering if you know whether, you guys or people in Chad or Ada are working on getting that definition changed, because that is what would really allow coaching from how I read the definition.
It's a really
and that's
great
why I
question.
put the information about what the definition was.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of outsource and crowdsource this because I don't have an answer to that question. But it's a really good question. I do know that ADA has different work groups that specifically looks at stuff like this. And I know that Chet also has advocacy stuff that they're doing as well. But I do not have an up-to-date any information on that. Does anyone who is listening right now have anything they can throw in the chat that we can share it with Kathleen? And I don't know if Laura or Brian, do you know anything about this?
This is a big issue to me because I'm on Medicaid and I would love to do coaching, but again, I cannot afford to do coaching because I get SSI, so I just don't have money to do it. But I can't get Medicaid, just won't pay for it. They wouldn't even pay for a winter depression light. And they claimed it was too expensive when it's one of the cheapest ways to do it because you're not continually paying for medicine. But they don't consider it the same as medicine, and so they wouldn't cover it. I just thought I would bring the subject up because how many of us have actually been able to read the definition? We don't go into the law and read the definition.
Yeah. So, all right, let's go to another question here. Lindsay, how are you?
Hi, folks. I've had a real good idea that I had this issue when my son was diagnosed at 6. He's now 30 years old, lost his job due to addictive behaviors just recently. I don't feel he's getting the treatment he should, but obviously I can't interfere. But I was hoping to help more or less lead the way in a sense and got my diagnosis. I'm 62 years old and I'm myself and I can't avoid that, but trying to do the right thing. That's what I try to coach him about is when you're facing life and you're facing issues is try and do the quote right thing. You know what it is, but it can be so damn difficult. It's difficult to engage in things you're supposed to. At any rate, in my question, I'm having a very hard time doing what I'm supposed to do, exercise, journaling, et cetera, things I'm supposed to do, but have a horrendous time bringing myself to even take a walk most of the time. I've been told when interviewed by a coach, she didn't think I was ready for self-care. That was rather shocking, but it rings a little true. I'm sorry, I don't hear you, Lisa.
I think it was the look of shock.
Sorry, I was shocked at the not ready for self-care. Like that doesn't compute in my mind what that even means.
Sorry. Did, but she did well. At any rate, that certainly did hit hard. Any ideas for how to do the right thing more often? This bleeds into much of life. I've even expressed to myself many times as I've thought about what I would say to another professional or someone that I feel outright trapped. I assume I need some clinical help. I'm not very good at helping myself, obviously, or I wouldn't be struggling this hard.
But you're also
Anyway.
here right now asking a question about
Which
something, right? And you've sought out coaching and you're like,
Which is, that's when you hurt bad enough, right?
well, yeah. I mean, that's true for most of us. You know, it's like I'm a great meditator when like life is like stressful as all hell. Like I'm an awful meditator when life's going pretty well.
And much like Charles, I'm my own motivation, and that's really terrible. I'm trying to revert my career back to where I was 20 years ago, and it's taking some education. And I won't even admit how long it's taken me to get through that process. And I'm not there yet. And I'm very disappointed, as are people around me. And all that does is just heap more shame.
Sure.
At any rate.
So one thing that I think is a helpful thing to remember is that ADHD is a performance disorder, which means we know what to do. That's not the issue. The issue is doing it.
Amen.
So if it's an issue of sort of that inattention, you know, when our primary sort of symptoms are more in the inattentive thing, making it as close to 0 steps as possible to engage in something is going to make it easier. If it's impulsivity, making it as close to as many steps as possible so you don't engage in the thing you're trying to maybe avoid engaging. So putting barriers or tearing down barriers, right? It sort of all depends on what that functional impairment is around the ADHD. You know, when you said about the self-care thing, I had a therapist I was working with a few years ago, and I was trying to work on some of my sleep procrastination issues. And after a few weeks of not really making much progress with this, she said to me, "Well, I just think you're not really motivated to actually work on this." I fired her because I was very explicit of like, there's this really frustrating gap because I am very intellectually motivated. I know the benefit of the sleep. Like, it's frustrating that like I do this rinse and repeat every night. Like, today's going to be the day that I go to sleep early, and then I don't. And then I say, I'm going to try again tomorrow. Rinse and repeat, like for most of my adult life. And it's a frustrating thing, but it's also something that if I'm hearing from someone who I'm telling, this is aggravating, this is frustrating, and I'm still not doing anything about it to change, there's something else going on, right? And it's not that I'm not ready for it. It's just we haven't identified the right solution or the right cause of what that barrier is. There was a question in the chat, do I use a white noise machine? I sometimes do, yes, for sleep. And no, I just got distracted because I usually don't look at the chat while we're doing this. And that's why, because I see that and I'm like, oh, that thought just went out my brain. Brian.
I just wanted to chime in on, I'm really glad, Lindsay, that you are aware of the role of the shame that you feel when you don't do these things, when you don't do the things that we want to do, because over time that compounds, and the symptomology of that, leaving that unchecked, often tragically, ironically, manifests very similar to the symptoms of ADHD itself. That compounded shame actually kind of turbocharges the ADHD. That's one reason, like with our multi-modality approach in coaching, we also address the shame and the underlying feelings as well as the practical skills. So I'm really happy that you're aware of that. Many of the people we meet in coaching are not intuitively aware of that when we begin working with them. So I would encourage you to really explore that and open yourself up to the idea, like, okay, what is me and what is the shame? What is me and what is my emotional reaction? And I know we already kind of covered it, but I just wanted to circle back because I think it cannot be underestimated how important that is.
Yeah, I'll second and third that. Laura?
Thank you, Brian.
I've got a 1, 2, 3 punch on this that's pretty short. A, not ready for self-care is bullshit. It's a giant red flag. This is not a good coach. I will give the caveat, maybe good for someone else, but not for you. Not for you. Maybe you do need to start smaller, but you can still do self-care. Brian was just talking about shame and how shame and the symptoms of shame can present as ADHD symptoms. There has been quite a bit of research recently about ADHD and CPTSD, which is to say that we develop a form of PTSD after decades of having the little t trauma. So not going to war, not a car crash, but the little t trauma of being told that we are bad, that we are wrong, that we can't do things. And so that leads directly into this wonderful quote from Brene Brown, which is, shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change.
Yeah.
And I'm just pausing right there. The other part of this is, she says, we desperately don't want to experience shame and we're not willing to talk about it. Yet the only way to resolve shame is to talk about it.
Mm. And I think right there is why group is so powerful and why it's so effective.
It's remarkable. Thank you, Laura.
And if I just may follow up on that point, I can't remember the details right now, but there was a study that I read about in basically all the ADHD organizations about the messaging that ADHD children receive. That someone correct me if I get the numbers wrong, but I think it's like by the age of 7, ADHD children typically get about 10,000 pieces of negative messaging that a neurotypical child may not get in the same position. Now, compound that over a lifetime as an adult. And I'm not trying to overwhelm you with that. I'm just saying, like, it's a real thing, and you don't have to like just accept that. Like, yeah, this is a real problem. It exists in the world. It's been demonstrated scientifically that this is a problem, and we so often are undercut the role of those feelings, those emotions, and our feelings of self-worth when we think about practical applications like doing things every day, achieving tasks. So, just highlighting how very real that is.
Thank you very much. I've been poking around when I've been able and willing, which isn't all that often, since I was diagnosed in March, to learn understand more about ADHD. Watched a lot of Dr. Barkley. Strike and shame, that's a big bell that's being rung when I hear it. A huge difference between my son and myself, and I've been very professionally successful and socially successful, even though I'm this crippled mess. As I was growing up, I could not be ADHD. There was a lot of penalty for that in a lot of formats, obviously, and including physical. So I learned a lot of ways to cope, and I've been told that I overcame what I am and who I am through my intellect. And I guess that makes a whole lot of sense. But here I am, and I look at my son, who I didn't want to bring up that way, and basically, made my best effort not to. And here he is struggling the way he is, and he's hit 30. I think that's a market difference, and I'm paying my price and he's paying his, and we both need to get more help.
I mean,
and thank you all.
Of course. And thanks for coming here to ask these questions. And, I think too, when as a parent, especially when we see our kids struggling with similar issues, it's hard for us to sort of separate, like, how do we support our kid as our child, even for you as an adult child, without sort of projecting our own issues onto that. I regularly have to sort of catch myself in that. I definitely my son has 2 different therapists that he works with, one at school, one privately. Could I help him with these issues? Yes, but I'm also his dad, and that's recognizing that sometimes things need to come from somebody else.
Yeah, and even the concept of needing therapy brings its own damn shame. So there you go.
Well, I'll tell you, as someone who's been in and out of therapy for their entire life, and has become a trained as a therapist by work as a coach. Like, I love therapy because it's so damn helpful. Good therapy is, anyways. All right, let's go to another question. I know we're getting a little bit short on time here.
So the basic of this one says, I want to ask about accountability for myself with a loved one. If I struggle to fully understand myself, my spouse is even further behind on understanding. Do you have any suggestions on how to communicate with someone that doesn't understand that the reason why I do something that doesn't make sense to them, and defending my stance? How can I still show accountability and not be so defensive? That would cause an angry conversation from both of us not feeling heard.
So my first thought on this is take a handful of the most pressing issues where you're not feeling understood, and just sit down with pen and paper, Google Docs, and so don't try to have to share the stuff in your head in a conversation. Like, plan for the conversation and use your notes. If you come across something that you feel like, oh, yes, that's it, that describes what I'm going through, like, share that piece of content with your partner. Because I think that even just sharing, like, I don't know how to fully explain this to you because I feel like I have this thing in my head and in my life experience that I get that I'm not explaining it well enough to you. Can you assume that what I'm telling you is real? And can you ask me questions so I can better explain this to you? Because I want you to understand what it is that I'm experiencing. Any of you have other ideas?
I always worry I'm repeating myself with this one, but I feel like there is a good starting place on these sorts of issues. Number one is reading the book, The ADHD Effect on Marriage by Melissa Orlov. She is a phenomenal speaker. She herself is not neurodivergent, and I like to tell people that right up front. She is, however, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly empathetic. The secondary piece of this is A, couples counseling, and B, looking at the Gottman method and John Gottman's books that he has written with his wife. They have a love lab, they call it, and they examine how people communicate. And from that, they can judge, I believe they have a 90% accuracy rate of whether or not those couples are going to make it in the long term. So those are both really wonderful resources.
Yeah, I think that just focusing on relationship-based communication is huge, and it doesn't like it can be helpful if it's ADHD focused, but it doesn't need to be ADHD focused, right? I mean, that's so kind of taking a look at how do you perform best in a hard conversation. It's maybe having notes is a good strategy for you to have. Maybe setting some parameters if you have a tendency to get flooded. Say, hey, if I get flooded during this conversation, we have a code word where I can just kind of walk out of the room, take a break, and we'll come back to it. So just kind of negotiate the terms of hard conversations before you're in the hard conversation. So I think that can be a really helpful approach. Anything else on that one? Okay. Well, that's great because we're right at about time here. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in and for listening. And we will catch you back here next month. We do this every second Tuesday of the month at 12:30 p.m. Central. So thanks, everybody. Well, that's it for today. And big thanks to our team for joining us in this recording of last month's live Q&A. And an even bigger thanks to all of the listeners who have joined us live. And remember, if you are listening to this early enough, remember you can join me today and the rest of the ADHD reWired team every second Tuesday of the month for our monthly live Q&As. Just go to ADHDrewired.com/events to register. That's ADHDrewired.com/events to register. So you can join us live on Zoom every second Tuesday of the month at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. And if you want to get show notes and any other resources that we mentioned in today's episode, head on over to ADHDrewired.com and click on the podcast tab at the top of the page. And want to get some bonus content or answers to questions not answered in our regular episodes, then consider becoming a patron, because when you support us on Patreon, you can get ad-free episodes with the ads at the very end of the episode for just $5 a month, and members can also get bonus content there as well. And members who support us at $25 a month can join me every fourth Tuesday of the month for a coaching call. I just want to thank you, all of our patrons, all of our listeners, and everyone who has contributed to this community for helping us run smoothly. Hey, you want to get access to real-time around-the-clock body doubling? Try out our co-working community at adultstudyhall.com. We have weekly facilitated sessions. We have a 24/7 drop-in room and more. It's always open. adultstudyhall.com. It's free to try for the first week and only $19.99 a month after that. Learn more about everything that we are doing at our website at ADHDrewired.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week.